TCU continues to build numbers for their offensive line room. Can they trust their O-line coaches to develop them?
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We thank you for joining us today. We're brought to you today by Nissan. Check out Nissan's latest deals. We'll tell you about them later on in the show. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I've been covering TCU athletics for the past 12 seasons. I'm back from vacation, was on a little spring break trip with the family, but I'm back, and we have some news in the football front. Also, Big 12 women's basketball. TCU, they win the Big 12 tournament title. The men tip off today against Colorado, but we start with some football news. The Frogs have landed another commitment for the 2026 class. Jordan Burnett from Ridge Point High School in Missouri City, Texas. He's listed as an offensive tackle, but on his junior season tape, he's playing the guard position. And the biggest thing about Jordan that stands out, 6'5", 330 pounds. He has size that you can't teach. And even at the offensive line position is pretty atypical. And with that size and that frame, I'm guessing, unless something changes in the next couple of years, he's projecting as an interior offensive lineman. Ridge Point's O-line in general is really big, but even he stands out when he lines up. And when you watch him on film, he's really good at finishing blocks. Like, the first thing that stands out is what you want from your offensive lineman. You want people that are nasty, that have a little mean streak, that aren't afraid to go finish a block, that aren't afraid to lay on top of somebody. And there's multiple instances in this tape where he's firing off the ball, getting up to the second level, latching onto linebackers, driving them down the field, and laying on top of them. It looks like Ridge Point played a lot of teams with odd fronts. So there were a number of times in pass pro where he was what I would call looking for work, where there wasn't an immediate threat, and he did a really good job of assessing the situation, finding the nearest person that he could hit, and just dumping them on the ground. So there were times where his center was engaged with a nose guard in a pass protection situation. He would just slide over, throw that person on the ground, and eliminate that potential for a tackle for loss or a sack or anything like that. He looks like he moves pretty well for somebody who's 330 pounds. This is not – when we start talking about guys that are this big, and he is nowhere near the player that I'm going to compare him to, but I don't know how many of you, the first thought that came to your mind when you hear about a dude that's huge even for an offensive lineman was Braylon Ramsey Brooks, who was a South Oak Cliff commit a few years ago. And he was a very intriguing player because he had just an incredible frame and incredible size. Now, he was up over 400 pounds. And ultimately for TCU, they couldn't get him to a place physically where it made sense to keep him on the roster. But Jordan's nowhere near that type of player. He's got more athleticism. There were times on tape where he would pull around, kick out the defensive end, and he looked pretty fluid doing it, get down the field in the screen game. Looked like he was, doing fine, finding work, finding somebody to block, and pretty much staying right in the area of those skill position players, that running back and the wide receiver that was taking the ball. So no real concerns there. Now, I think they're going to have to figure out when he gets on campus, like, what do we want him to play at? Where do we need him to be? What's the best situation for him? But that's every O-lineman and really every player that comes through campus. TCU has done a really good job over the past few recruiting cycles of stocking up on offensive linemen. Now, so far in this 2026 class, they've had a big emphasis on the D-line. But 2024 and 2025 specifically, they really have worked hard on let's build the numbers back up, because that was one of the glaring issues from a roster management standpoint when the Gary Patterson era ended. They just had no depth at the offensive line spot, and they really had no promising young guys that they were trying to bring along and get to a place where they could play. So the roster as it stands now, you got guys like Tobias Stips, who you hope can come in and contribute. Ben Taylor Whitfield and Ryan Hughes have already made that step to contributing. Cooper Powers is a name to know, like Samir Camacho. There's a number of guys who seem to be breaking through and at least being involved to a place where they're at least being involved in the two deep. Witten Van Hoy is another name that's going to come up a lot in the next few months. Wesley Harvey is a very intriguing prospect because he wasn't a super highly rated player coming out of high school, but again, big, physical type of size that you can't teach. Jordan is listed right now. He doesn't have a ranking on 247 or the other recruiting sites, but his offer list, Arkansas State, Pitt, UTEP, Vandy, UTSA. So it's not like he's a completely unknown player. And the Frogs have done a nice job of identifying guys early in the process that we continue to see rise up the board. Another name, as far as young offensive linemen go, a guy that came in this recruiting class, Killian Registre from Keller, was pretty under recruited when he committed to TCU. But by the time that recruiting cycle wrapped up, he had all kinds of offers. He was technically a 4-star according to 247 Sports. And at least like guys like Tom Loy and some of those other scouting services, they've said, listen, that's a player that kind of under the radar. You don't know his name yet, but he might be the one in this TCU class that could have the most NFL potential just because of what he can do from a physicality standpoint. And so they've done a great job of putting these numbers together. And I think the Jordan Burnett signing commit, it's not a signing yet, but the commit early in this recruiting process is a good one. The question becomes now, can you develop these guys and get them to a place where they can be contributors? And the one reason why I would have concerns about that, over the past couple of years, we talked about the consistency issues with the offensive line. Now, this past season, it was really just in the run game. Pass protection wise, they did a nice job. Can AJ Ricker get these guys to a place where they can play at a high level? Now, they brought in Randy Clements this offseason to be the assistant offensive line coach, part of this big initiative that Sonny Dykes seems to be rolling out where they put in a lot of people on staff. Every position group has an assistant. They have their position group coach, and then another assistant who's helping out. Clements has a ton of experience. So I think he's going to be helpful in this regard because he's done a great job, whether it was at North Carolina, North Texas, Baylor. He's been everywhere. He's followed Kendall Briles around a lot of different places, of identifying talent and getting guys in a place where they can play. So you add that to this room, to the process of getting these players ready. That's a big plus, right? But if you're going to take this approach with the trenches, and I think it's a smart one given where TCU is in the recruiting pecking order, where, we have, and we'll see what happens throughout the rest of this recruiting cycle. But I feel like I do a couple episodes every year where it's like, hey, this 4-star tackle is going to visit TCU. That's awesome. And when the dust settles, TCU doesn't even really end up being a consideration. The latest with Bryce Gilmore. He visited TCU for TCU's junior day, very highly rated 4-star recruit. Didn't work out. He hasn't made a decision yet, but TCU's not in his top 5. And so we've done this over multiple recruiting cycles where it's like, hey, this blue chip lineman is at least thinking about the Frogs, but then it doesn't end up happening. So I think smartly they've gone about it a different way, and they've identified talent well, and they've found some guys that eventually have gotten to a place where they're closer to blue chip status. Overall, though, it's what we consider more developmental projects, which that in itself is not a problem. You can build a successful roster and a successful team with guys who can't miss prospects out of high school. But if you're going to do that, you have to have development within your coaching staff. Like once these guys get on campus, your coaches have to turn them into really good players. And part of that is the strength and conditioning piece of it, getting them physically to a place where they can play. But then it's also the skill, the attention to detail. How do they fit in your scheme? All those things make a difference. And so that's the big question now for this offensive line group. They've done a nice job of bringing in a number of players that could be good. Now you have to figure out and identify who those people are going to be, what it's going to look like when they get on campus, and how do you get them to a place where they're successful? And I think for the roster as a whole, it's not just an offensive line thing. I would say the philosophy and just the way the program is moving in general. They're recruiting at a high level for the Big 12. But if we're talking about a team that's going to consistently be in the Big 12 championship game, be in playoff consideration, then a lot of it's going to fall on Sonny and the coaching staff to get these guys to a place where they can contribute in their second and third season. And that's not something that historically Sonny has excelled at. So can he change that over the next few seasons? Well, we'll have to see. That's what Gary did really well. And I mean, I hate to compare the two, but it's always going to happen. And Gary would probably get upset at this because anytime people talk about how he did it with less talented players, he would take offense and be like, well, I thought the guys we had were super talented. And that's him being a good coach and defending his guys. I understand that. From a perception standpoint, though, a lot of the players that he brought in weren't necessarily the highest recruited guys, but he saw the potential. He had a vision. He had an idea in mind, and then he made them into really good players. And so that's what TCU has to do. And that's going to be the challenge, not only in the offensive line room, but everywhere moving forward. When we come back, I will tell you why the Big 12 tournament championship was good for TCU women's basketball. And the men, miracle run starts today. Let's get after it. It's Locked on Horned Frogs, your team every day. Well, a perfect transition into our basketball segment. Our friends at Nissan are bringing you their Nissan Team of the Week. Each week we'll do this. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked on College basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart, from top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets. These guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada clear-cut team of the week are the Duke Blue Devils. John Shire's team, led by National Player of the Year candidate Cooper Flagg, just ripped through the ACC, going 19-1. The Blue Devils were plus 434 points in ACC games, the largest point differential by a power conference team in league play since Kentucky in 1953 and 1954. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Duke Blue Devils have done. It's clear our team of the week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. We appreciate Nissan and their sponsorship here of the Locked On Network. Well, if Jamie Dixon's team is going to be in the NCAA tournament, they're going to have to win 5 games in 5 days. And that starts today when they take on Colorado at 2 p.m. in Kansas City. They're coming off playing Colorado in the season finale, and they got blitzed. They lost by 20 points in Boulder. Was never really a competitive game. I mean, TCU was within 7 to 10 points through a lot of that game. So you might be confused. That's why I'm saying that. But I feel like if you watched and kept up with it, there was never really a point where you felt like, okay, Frogs are going to come back and do this and pull this off. They got outclassed by Colorado in the regular season finale. And so, I mean, the conference tournament, hope springs eternal. It's like the one chance to reset and get after it and say, you know what? Our season's on the line. Back is against the wall every single day over the next few days. So they're playing Colorado today. If they win, they'll get West Virginia. If they win that game, they'll most likely get Iowa State. And then if they defeat Iowa State, that would put them in the Big 12 semifinals. Then you got to go win 2 more games. So it's always been an uphill battle. As much as we love to think about the Cinderella stories of March, and you see 1 or 2 teams a year, it happens more in the smaller conferences than it does in the big conferences. But, I mean, UConn with Kimbo Walker, and they went all the way to the title game, the national title game, I mean. Syracuse had some great runs in the Big East and ACC tournaments. We see it from time to time. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult because you have to win multiple games in multiple days. And just to be real about it, if you're a team that couldn't win consistently during the regular season, your chances of stringing together a lot of victories is going to be tough. But in the old Big 12 format, it at least made a little more sense because if you won 3 or 4 games, you could win it all. Now, like 5 games in 5 days against tougher competition, that's going to be really rough. And I mean, looking ahead, like Iowa State is just a horrible matchup for this team because they can't score and they just don't have guys that can go get their own buckets. But that's a long way away. Bottom line is today you play Colorado. And did losing to Colorado in the regular season finale matter in the grand scheme of things? I guess not. I mean, it's not like the loss to Baylor was essentially the elimination game for any big, any NCAA tournament hopes, with the exception of winning the Big 12 tournament. But it's still disappointing that they weren't ready to play. And I mean, there's limitations with this group. Like, that's clear. And there's some things you just can't overcome. At a certain point, you can't really overcome the talent deficiency you have. But UCF on the road, Cincinnati on the road, Colorado on the road. There's just been multiple games this year where it feels like they haven't even gotten off the bus. And it's not just, oh man, we don't have dudes who can score. This is frustrating. It's just not bringing the energy and intensity you need to win the ball game. And so that's been the most disappointing part of the season to me. They finished the regular season in conference play 9-11. And I mean, again, this is an opportunity, but the way that they limped to the finish line, it doesn't feel super hopeful. But hey, clean slate, get out there and play. And I still maintain that any sort of postseason appearance could be good for this team moving forward because of the young players you have on the roster. But I'm getting less enthusiastic about it with these losses because it just feels like this particular group has lost its way. Now, hopefully they can bounce back and prove me wrong. But at the moment, I don't feel like this is a team that's locked and loaded and ready to go make any sort of run. I think they're a group that is honestly just begging for the finish line. They're like, hey, if this could end today, that would be great. But new opportunity, new chance for TCU basketball when they take on Colorado this afternoon in the first round of the Big 12 tournament. The TCU women, congratulations to Mark Campbell. Congratulations to Haley Van Lith, Sedona Prince, all the ladies. They won the Big 12 tournament. Went 3-0. They took down West Virginia in the semifinals. Who'd they play in the opening round? I'm blanking now. Colorado. They beat Colorado. They took down West Virginia, and then they beat Baylor in the Big 12 championship game. And that Baylor game was almost identical to the game they played in Waco a couple weeks ago. TCU got out to a bigger lead in this ball game. They're up by 11 at one point. They struggled to shoot the ball again, but so did Baylor. They played great defense. And late in the ball game, though, here come the Bears. They roared back. They tied it at one point. Haley Van Lith got a big bucket late to give them a 2-point lead. Here's why I think the Big 12 tournament was beneficial. It was historic in that, yes, they swept the season series against Baylor. They had that long losing streak to them. They won 3 games against them this year. They won a regular season title and a Big 12 tournament title. It's amazing. Mark Campbell got here like 2 years ago. He's already got this thing turned around in a huge way. For this team, when we talk about the NCAA tournament, which we'll get a selection Sunday like next week. So they get a full week off, which is really good for this group because the problem that this team is going to have, there's just not a lot of depth, right? We've talked about it all year. Donovan Hunter and Taylor Bigby have kind of traded coming off the bench. And so that's been a good 1-2 punch. Bigby's got to find her shot. She struggled to shoot the ball in Kansas City. Roberson comes off the bench, Aaliyah Roberson, and she's done some good things. She's also struggling to shoot the ball. But that's about it. Daisha Merrill, if Sedona Prince gets in foul trouble. And honestly, I wish they would play Daisha a little bit more because I think she gives them good minutes. And I just believe as valuable as Sedona is, you could give her some rest here and there and it'd be okay. But I know a lot of that has to do with their defense is so predicated on funneling everything to her, to Sedona, that I'm talking about. and allowing her to protect the rim and block shots and alter shots. And so that's a huge part of what they do. They are most likely going to be a 2 seed. I don't know this for sure, but typically the women's tournament committee likes to keep brackets pretty regional. So they'll put a 1 and 2 seed together that are in the same area. So if I had to guess, I think they will end up in Texas's region. Texas is going to be a 1 seed. And I think it would make sense to put Texas 1, TCU on the 2 line, and then wherever that, regional championship game ends up, you could potentially have an Elite 8 matchup with very familiar foes. I think this is an Elite 8 squad. Now, you got to see what your 3 seed's going to be. You got to see what the 7 seed's going to be. But they have, with Prince, Connor, and Van Lith, they've got 3 players who can go and can make it happen. And I was super impressed with Haley in the Big 12 championship game. There have been times this year where I've thought Haley was a little overwhelmed by the physicality and pressure that teams were putting on her when they would play good teams. Kansas State comes to mind. Honestly, that regular season finale against Baylor. Oklahoma State late in that ball game. Teams have been physical. They blitzed around pick and rolls, and she's just kind of struggled to get her shots, to get the ball to the players. But she was very in control in the Big 12 championship game. Had some clutch buckets. And hopefully that's something that carries over for this group. They've played in a lot of close games this year. Now, it's been in, honestly, a lot of games where it feels like they should have won by 15 or 20, and it just sort of got away from them at the end. But the benefit of that is they've been tested, and they understand, okay, this is what it takes to win ball games. We have to make big plays. We have to do things at a high level. Congratulations to them. I'm super excited to see what they do in the NCAA tournament upcoming. And those first 2 games are going to be in Fort Worth. They're going to be hosting here in a couple weeks. We'll come back and wrap things up. It's Locked on Horned Frogs, your team every day. Does NIL feel like something that doesn't apply to you? Does it feel like something that is so far away? It's been handled behind closed doors. We don't have a clear picture of what's going on, what the deals are, and we don't know how, as fans, we can directly support the players that we love. Now you can do that with the Roy app. You can choose a player you want to support, decide how much to contribute, and get exclusive content straight from the TCU athletes you back. The best part, if the players transfer, you get your money back. So it's a risk-free way to show your support and make your voice heard. Support your favorite players directly and help shape the future of TCU sports. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing TCU athletes the way they deserve with transparency, trust, and real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. TCU baseball swept Fresno State over the weekend. I'll be honest, since I was on vacation, I haven't had a chance to really dig into that yet, but I'm going to try to watch these games over the next few days and, start forming some opinions on what's going on. I know Braden Sloan had a good outing in relief. He's been great. Looks like Noah Franco is starting to hit the ball really hard. Conference play starts this weekend. It always sneaks up on us with baseball because it's in the middle of basketball season and the basketball postseason specifically, but the non-conference slate is done. They play Arizona State in a 3-game series starting Friday. Arizona State is 12-4, I believe. They're playing good ball. Let's hit the ground running and get right after it. I think we're seeing the Ben Abelt trickle-down effect. So your Friday starter and Cademan Parker has been pretty solid. Tommy Lepore had a rough outing Saturday, but overall he's been good. Sundays have been an adventure. And Trevor Baumler has gotten some opportunities as a freshman. Hasn't really worked out so far. Not sure how Kirk will approach that moving forward, but they're going to have to find a third starter to make this thing happen and to make this thing work. That's going to be the biggest priority for them moving forward. We'll have plenty of coverage of that. We'll keep tabs on TCU basketball as long as they're in the Big 12 tournament and what it looks like for them in the postseason and the women as they prepare to play in the postseason as well. It's Locked on Horned Frogs. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast.